The morning air over the Sea of Galilee was still cool when Peter, Thomas, Nathanael, James, John, and two other disciples decided to fish. It had been days since the resurrection, days filled with awe and confusion, with the wonder of seeing Jesus alive mingled with questions about what came next. That night, they went out on the familiar waters, not as men chasing a livelihood, but as men seeking a sense of normalcy in a world that had turned upside down. Hour after hour, they cast their nets into the dark, empty waters. Their arms ached, their backs strained, yet the nets came up as light as when they were thrown. The silence of the night was broken only by the splash of the nets and the quiet lapping of waves. For seasoned fishermen, such a night was not just disappointing, it was unsettling. Something about it carried a weight that went deeper than hunger or income. It was as if the emptiness of the nets mirrored the uncertainty in their hearts. As dawn began to lift the darkness, a figure stood on the shore. The light was pale and soft, making it hard to recognize him. He called out, his voice carrying over the water, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" They answered simply, "No." Then came the instruction, strange in its simplicity and oddly familiar. "Throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." Something in the tone, perhaps a quiet authority or a memory stirred, prompted obedience. The net hit the water, and in an instant, the calm surface erupted with life. Fish thrashed and swirled in a frenzy so great that the disciples could barely manage the weight. This was no ordinary catch. It was abundance beyond their skill, beyond their effort, beyond explanation. In that moment, John's eyes widened as recognition flooded in. He turned to Peter and said, "It is the Lord." The realization shattered the thin veil between routine and miracle. Peter, impetuous and eager, threw on his outer garment and plunged into the water, leaving the catch behind to meet the one who had called them years before and who now stood alive again. This was not the call to become fishers of men they had once heard on a different shore. This was a reminder that the risen Christ still meets his people in the midst of their ordinary work, still transforms empty nights into mornings of overflowing grace. It was a moment that said, even after failure, even after fear, even after you think the story is over, I am here, and I provide more than you can imagine. The boat drew closer to shore, the heavy net dragging behind, its weight a constant reminder of the miracle they had just witnessed. Every time the disciples adjusted their grip, fish shimmered in the net, flashing silver in the growing light. Yet their focus was no longer on the catch. All eyes were fixed on the figure waiting for them on the beach. Peter, soaked from his swim, reached the shore first. His chest heaved from the exertion, but there was no hesitation in his steps as he moved toward Jesus. The last time he had been this close before the crucifixion, it was in the courtyard of the high priest, where fear had led him to deny the one he loved. Now every movement toward Jesus felt like a chance to close the distance that failure had once created. When the others arrived, pulling the net to land, they saw that Jesus had already prepared a fire of burning coals. Bread lay ready and fish sizzled in the heat. The smell of the fire brought an unexpected wave of memory. Another charcoal fire, in another place, on a night filled with denial and shame. Yet here, the scene was different. This was not a place of accusation, but of welcome. Jesus looked at them and said, "Bring some of the fish you have just caught." Peter, ever the one to act, went back to the net and hauled it ashore. The Gospel records the number, 153 large fish, and yet the net was not torn. Every detail was a quiet testimony, the abundance of the catch, the strength of the net, the presence of the risen Lord. "Come and have breakfast," Jesus said. It was a simple invitation, but it carried the weight of grace. Around that fire there were no grand speeches, no sharp rebukes, only the quiet sharing of food. The one who had conquered death was serving them breakfast. The world had changed forever, yet in this moment it was as personal and intimate as friends sharing a morning meal after a long night. None of them asked, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Recognition was no longer just about seeing his face. It was about experiencing his presence, the same presence that had filled their empty nets and their empty hearts. This was more than a miracle of provision. It was a reminder that in the risen Christ's company, there is restoration, abundance, and the quiet assurance that he still meets his people where they are, drawing them back into fellowship with him. The fire crackled softly, its warmth cutting through the cool morning air. The disciples sat in a loose circle, eating in silence, each one lost in thought. For all the joy of seeing him again, there was still an unspoken weight between them. Memories of fear, of fleeing in the garden, of hiding in locked rooms. No one felt this more deeply than Peter. Every bite of bread reminded him of another meal, one they had shared before everything fell apart. Back then, he had declared boldly that he would never fall away, that he would even die before denying Jesus. But the crowing of a rooster had shattered that vow. Now, each glance toward the Lord stirred both love and shame in his heart. After the meal, Jesus turned to Peter. The others listened, the air suddenly thick with the sense that something important was about to happen. "Simon, son of John," Jesus said, "do you love me more than these?" Peter's answer was quick, perhaps too quick. "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus replied, "Feed my lambs." It was not a casual command. In those few words, Jesus entrusting to Peter the care of his people, his flock. But he was not finished. Again, Jesus asked, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter's voice softened. "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." "Take care of my sheep," Jesus said. A third time came the question, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" The repetition cut deep. It matched the number of Peter's denials, each question peeling back another layer of hurt, exposing the wound fully so that it could be healed. Peter's eyes dropped. "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." "Feed my sheep," Jesus said. In this moment, the failure that had haunted Peter was met with grace. Each denial was answered with a renewed calling. Jesus was not merely forgiving him, he was restoring him to purpose. Peter would not be remembered only for his weakness, but for the mission he was now recommissioned to fulfill. The others watched, understanding that this was more than a private exchange. It was a living demonstration of the Lord's mercy, a reminder that no failure was too great for his restoration. If Peter, the one who had denied him in his hour of greatest need, could be redeemed and entrusted with leadership, then there was hope for all who follow him. The sea lay calm before them, sunlight dancing across its surface. The disciples felt the quiet power of what had just taken place. Peter, once crushed by his own shame, now stood among them restored, his eyes alive with a new strength. The weight of the past had not been erased, it had been redeemed. Jesus rose and looked out over the waters where the nets had once burst with fish. The miracle they had witnessed was not only about provision, it was a living parable. A reminder that when they worked in their own strength, the nets stayed empty, but when they obeyed his word, the results were abundant beyond measure. He turned back to them, and though his words were few, his presence spoke volumes. They understood now that their calling was not to return to ordinary life, even if fishing was what they knew best. The catch had been a sign, an unmistakable call to cast their nets in a new way for a new kind of harvest. They remembered his words from earlier days, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." That calling had not been cancelled by their failures or their doubts. It was still theirs, renewed and confirmed on this very shore. As they stood together, the air seemed to hum with purpose. Each of them, in their own way, had been marked by this encounter. They had seen again that the Lord could turn scarcity into abundance, futility into fruitfulness. More than that, they had seen that he could take the broken and make them whole. The shoreline, still fragrant with the smoke of their breakfast, would remain in their memories. It was the place where empty nets became full, where shame turned into restoration, and where purpose was reborn. The waves lapped gently at their feet, as if whispering that the same power which filled their nets would go with them into every place he sent them. They didn't know all that lay ahead, persecution, hardship, journeys to distant lands, but they knew the one who had called them was faithful. And if he could command fish to swim into a net, he could command hearts to turn toward the truth they would preach. The morning sun climbed higher, and though they had once been tempted to return to their old lives, the thought of leaving this mission was no longer possible. They were no longer just fishermen. They were witnesses of the risen Christ, carriers of the good news, and shepherds of the flock he loved. The morning breeze carried the scent of salt and the lingering aroma of cooked fish. The disciples sat in a quiet circle, their eyes fixed on Jesus. His gaze moved from one face to another, not hurried, not distracted, but fully present with each of them. It was as if he was writing something permanent into their hearts without using a single pen or parchment. Peter's heart still thudded from their earlier conversation, when the Lord had asked him 3 times, "Do you love me?" Each repetition had been like a stone thrown into the deep waters of his soul, stirring what had long been unsettled. He now knew that his calling was not just to fish for people, it was to tend the flock, to care for those who would follow Christ in the years to come. The others listened intently, absorbing each word. Jesus didn't simply tell them about the mission, he embodied it before their eyes. The miracle of the overflowing nets had been more than provision for their breakfast. It was a visible demonstration that obedience to his word would always bear fruit, even when circumstances seemed barren, even when the night yielded nothing. They thought back to that empty night, when they had toiled without a single fish. How quickly they had fallen into the temptation of returning to what was familiar. How easily they had forgotten that the power for their mission came not from their skill, but from their Lord. And yet, he had met them there, not with condemnation, but with abundance. Jesus began to speak of things to come, of the Spirit who would guide them, of the work that would stretch far beyond the shores of Galilee. They would be sent into the world as his witnesses, not only to their own people, but to nations they had never seen, among tongues they had never heard. And in the same way that fish had filled their nets at his command, so too would souls be drawn into the kingdom when they cast the gospel net in obedience to him. Every glance toward the water seemed to carry a new meaning. The sea, vast and unpredictable, was like the world they would face, filled with unseen depths, hidden dangers, and countless lives in need of rescue. But they knew now that no wave was too high, no current too strong, when the Master was with them. The meal ended, but the moment lingered. Jesus stood, his shadow stretching long over the sand, and the disciples followed. Ahead lay the road of faith, the labor of love, and the endurance of hope. Behind them lay the night of empty nets. Between the two stood the risen Christ, who had turned their failure into a testimony and their weakness into strength. They walked from that shore with a renewed certainty. Their nets would never be empty again, not when they cast them at his word. The waves whispered against the shoreline as the disciples watched Jesus walk a short distance ahead of them. Every step felt heavy with meaning, as if the sand itself remembered the weight of his feet from times past. This was not merely the end of a morning's fishing, it was the beginning of a life that would never be the same again. Peter glanced back at the boat, still pulled up onto the shore. The nets lay in a heap, damp and tangled, their strands still clinging to scales that shimmered in the sunlight. They were a reminder of both the struggle of the night and the abundance of the morning. He thought of the countless times he had relied on his own skill, only to come up empty. But one word from Jesus had filled the nets beyond their breaking point. That truth settled deep within him. The success of their mission would always rest on obedience, not on effort alone. The others carried the same quiet conviction. John, remembering the moment he had first recognized the Lord's voice that morning, knew that his role would be to listen, to always discern the presence of Jesus even when the world's noise tried to drown it out. Thomas, who had once doubted, now felt a steady assurance that faith would often require stepping forward before all the answers were clear. As they walked, Jesus' presence was both familiar and mysterious. He spoke of peace, of perseverance, of the certainty that he would be with them to the end of the age. He did not promise an easy road. There would be storms, opposition, and moments when the nets felt empty again. But he promised himself, and that was enough. The shoreline gave way to open paths leading into the hills. The sea lay behind them, but its lesson remained. They had been called to fish for people, not in the shallow waters of their own understanding, but in the deep, unpredictable ocean of God's plan. The catch would be great, not because they were strong, but because the one who commanded the sea was faithful. As the sun rose higher, casting light over the water, they could see the place where they had first spotted him that morning. The coals from the fire were likely cool now, the bread and fish long gone, but the warmth of his presence had left a mark they would carry forever. Every meal they shared from that day on, every net they cast, every step they took into new lands would carry the echo of that moment. This was not the same as the first time he had called them to follow. That had been an invitation into a journey. This was a commissioning, a sending out with the full knowledge of who he was, what he had conquered, and what he was entrusting to them. They would leave the shore with nets in hand, not to return to their old life, but to embrace the new one fully. And somewhere deep in their hearts, they knew that one day when all the work was done, they would see that same fire on the shore again, this time at the edge of eternity, and hear his voice calling them to come and eat.